Hello. Hi.
Hi.
Which mic is on? Okay. We'll awkwardly share this mic.
We'll do it.
Okay. All right. Well,
It's
good.
time.
Please take your seats.
This is the moment.
We're the only thing between you and Wally.
It is officially 3:50.
Okay. Should we do our intros?
Do our intros. All right.
You want to start, Amanda Haymaker?
Good afternoon. Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda Haymaker from Purdue University.
I'm Stephanie Scott from Columbia University.
And I'm Amanda Humphrey from Northeastern University.
We are the FDP Subawards Subcommittee. Here we go. Here's the agenda. It's a full-packed agenda today, and we have a special guest speaker at the very end. Before we get started and we go through what's on the agenda, one of the complaints that we got from the last meeting is that folks couldn't hear other people's questions. So I am going to ask, and I know you are a rowdy bunch that likes to ask very great questions. Please go to the microphone and ask your question. Because one, this session's being recorded. We want to be able to capture your question on here. And I also want to make sure that everyone can hear your question. So, first we're going to start off with some updates. We're going to go through some very exciting things with clinical trials, and we're going to open it up for discussion in terms of next steps. We'll give a few updates regarding our working groups and our templates. Amanda's going to be talking about IACUC, some issues that have been brought to our attention with regards to MOUs being passed back and forth from different institutions. And then we have Melissa Korf and Martha Davis, who are going to give an update about next steps regarding data use language to potentially be incorporated into the subboard templates. We'll have a short discussion about certificates of confidentiality. And then finally, we're going to have a really great discussion about the late issuance of subawards, or what I like to call the Untitled Kathy Creedler Project. Sounds like a rock album. So Kathy Creedler is the AVP of the Sponsored Projects Administration over at UT Health, University of Texas, the Health Sciences Center at Houston. So here we go. Hot off the press, as of this morning, you saw it officially. The announcement came out from NIH. This was our Great Koger FDP collaboration regarding prior approvals of, let me say it, fixed rate agreements. Let's not confuse this with fixed price or fixed amounts. We got the prior approval waived when it comes to issuing domestic subawards of any dollar amount for clinical trials. So congratulations, thank you, we did it. The announcement's out. Just a quick review. You know, we're talking here about fixed rate. We were able to do this because we found some language in the DoD general terms and conditions that we piggybacked off of, presented it over to NIH, and they said, oh, that makes sense. Okay, and so we were all on the same page. So we're talking about negotiated per patient costs, where the total amount of the award may not be known. And prior approval will not be required to enter into this type of agreement, provided that there's no other factors. So obviously, you know, in the grants policy statement, there may be other factors regarding this where you do need to get NIH prior approval, such as working with a foreign subrecipient. And the simplified acquisition threshold is not going to apply since they are not based on fixed amounts. We're talking about fixed rates. Now, let's talk about the simplified acquisition threshold for a moment. So when it comes to everything else, not clinical trials, not fixed rate per patient type of agreements, per participant type of agreement, you still do need prior approval for those up to the simplified acquisition threshold. That is the new simplified acquisition threshold of 250K instead of the 150K. Now, you may, and I'm sure you've been hearing a lot of discussion or have seen the June 20th memo regarding the new micro purchase threshold and the simplified acquisition threshold. Keep in mind that we can apply these rules now, today, but only when it comes to grants and cooperative agreements, not federal contracts. And so until these new thresholds are codified in the FAR, this does not apply to federal contracts. So if you're issuing a subcontract off of a prime federal contract, the simplified acquisition threshold is still 150 until it's codified. So does this make sense so far? We're good. Okay, so let me say here, baby steps, clinical trials. All right, so this is just the beginning of the conversation. And so what's next? What's next when it comes to clinical trials? Because, and I thought this was a good time to open up this discussion as it relates to the NIH clinical trial definition. So actually, before we get to that, we do have to make changes to our current FDP fixed price sample, I'll say slash template. And when we comes to this particular sample, we like to call it a sample because there's more flexibility in terms of how you use it and what you can change in terms of certain terms in there and how you use attachment 2B. So we like to call it a sample as opposed to a template. But we realize and recognize that we do have to revise it and make sure that it's not called fixed price anymore, that it's called fixed rate. And in the interim, we did provide some guidance on the subboard listserv that in attachment 2B, you can indicate that the term fixed price is replaced universally with the term fixed rate. So Brenda Kavanaugh and Jennifer McAllister, Brenda Kavanaugh from University of Rochester, and Brenda Kavanaugh from University of Rochester and Jennifer McAllister from Duke Medical Center have agreed to co-lead the changes of that template sample to update it with fixed rate, also incorporate other potential changes, and also we'll be leading the group with the formatting changes of that as well. So we're talking about also revising the format, and we'll see where that goes. But we'll be providing information for you on the listserv when we're ready to kick off that work group and start making changes. So this raised this week an interesting question on the listserv about the NIH clinical trial definition. So we all know about that, where according to policy, as of January 25th of this year, there were a lot of new policies that took place at the proposal stage when proposing a clinical trial. And so it included such things as new forms, and NIH Forms E. It included that new PHS, Human Subjects Clinical Trial Information Form. The applicant had to choose a new funding announcement dedicated to clinical trials. And as we probably have heard, that definition of a clinical trial caused a lot of stir in terms of including things that would not have normally be considered a clinical trial in the traditional sense, such as biobehavioral studies or what you're hearing, prospective basic science studies. And so we have to now start thinking about how when we issue subawards, there are different flavors of clinical trials which are going to determine what template you use. And so we do want to kind of open up the discussion a little bit about what you've been talking at your institutions with regards to definitions and these different flavors of clinical trials. So let's talk about the different flavors of clinical trials. I'm going to use the analogy here. Let's think about this in terms of Coca-Cola. So first you have your traditional clinical trial. That's classic Coke, all right? So our template, the FDP clinical trial sample, was really based on a per-patient capitation budget model. These are, more traditionally your phase 3, phase 4 clinical trials where you're enrolling a lot of patients, you're testing drugs, and that's what that template is really for, is that multi-site enrolling a lot of patients, and the budget is per patient. We were using the term fixed price because of that. So then you have your second category, which is something that we've been hearing a lot from the community, or it comes up every now and then. But wait a minute, you know, not everything in my budget is per patient. I've got a few cost reimbursable types of costs, and it's really blended. It's a traditional clinical trial, but with cost reimbursable expenses. So I call this type of Coke, when I went to Canada last week, I saw in the vending machine, it was a Coca-Cola, Mandarin Orange. So I put in my coin, I had the Coca-Cola Mandarin Orange, and I tasted it. I was like, this doesn't quite taste right. It's not really totally Coke, but it's also, something's not working here. It's a blended mix of two different things. That's what I like to think of this type of clinical trial. I got cost reimbursable, I've got fixed price, it's not working, and it's leaving a bad taste in my mouth. So, so in terms of what template you use, there isn't a template for that. And so we've come up with a couple of workarounds. If you've come to us and asked us, well, what do I do when I have these two different types of costs? We're going to probably tell you, well, you really should issue two different types of subawards if this is how you initially issued it or proposed it this way in the initial proposal. Or sometimes we have other workarounds where we say, all right, you could take our FTP cost reimbursable template, use attachment 2B from the fixed price template included in there, but then you got to remove the FTP moniker. This is not ideal, and it's not really, I don't know what you call it, but we're going to talk about that a little bit, is how often does this really occur to you? And then we've got the third bucket of Coke. I'm going to call this new Coke. So if you remember new Coke from 1985 and the debacle it caused, and everybody was rioting in the streets, so that's where we are now. So the NIH clinical trial definition, so what's happening is now NIH is issuing notice of awards with that clinical trial indicator flag. It's in the special terms and conditions section 4. And just because it says yes, it's a clinical trial, your subaward staff, or if you're issuing subawards, you can't automatically think, oh, I go to the FTP fixed rate agreement. Oh, wait a minute, I should use the cost reimbursement one. It's not automatically that clinical trial in that sense. It's project specific. What is this project doing, and how was the budget initially put together? So one challenge I see is, depending on how your office is structured, your pre-award staff, the ones submitting proposals, you know, that's one section. I don't know if the subawards group may be aware about the new clinical trial definition. They may see a notice of award that says clinical trial and automatically pick up the FTP clinical trial template, but that may not be appropriate, because remember, that template or that sample was really designed with phase 3, phase 4 clinical trials in the traditional sense of the word, traditional Coke. So when you're issuing a subaward now under the new definition, it's project specific. The budget may be fixed rate capitation, or it may not be. So what template you use, it depends. So now, here we go. Where do we take it? What do we do next? So I want to hear a little bit from you. We want to hear about where we should take clinical trials next. So for those of you who've been coming to us and saying, hey, look, I've got this blended type of work here with cost reimbursable expenses and a fixed rate per patient, how often is this coming up for you? Is it easier for you to just issue 2 subawards? What are the issues regarding that in terms of splitting those out? I can imagine what some of those already potentially are. And if we do revise the FTP clinical trial sample, what are some of the things that we should be considering? And then finally, with the NIH clinical trial definition, I'd love to hear if you've been having discussions within your institutions with regards to issuing subawards. So I know that's a lot. You could just absorb that for a second. But I encourage you to go to the mic to start this discussion or to start asking questions. Who wants to start?
Once you put a mic up there, no one wants
Yeah,
to
no
talk.
one wants to come up once you put a mic up. Huh. Come up to the mic, Mike. Okay. No? Okay.
So one question I did have about the hybrids is sometimes there'll be an annual investigator meeting, particularly at the outset of a phase 3 clinical trial. And in some of my experiences, the institution has chosen to just directly reimburse the investigator for their expenses rather than trying to build it into the subaward. And now it seems that some institutions maybe want to be able to include it in the subaward. And so one of the questions we had is this hybrid situation mostly related to travel related expenses? Is it related to a certain amount of salary or effort that an investigator may have because, say, they're a co-investigator or they're helping to analyze the data at the end of the study? So we wanted to understand a little bit about that because that may help us talk to various members of the community to figure out what potential solutions may be.
Stephanie, ours isn't in a clinical trial setting, but we do have an award that we had to have both the fixed price and cost reimbursable, and we issued the subs that way. They're very complicated to keep track of. I don't know if anybody else has done that.
See, no one wants to go to the mic. Yeah, Lisa?
Well,
Okay.
anyway, it's very complicated. We have to have 2 project numbers, 1 sub number, and then when we have to enter it, it's just double. It is hard to keep track of.
All right. Do it.
Just to,
Oh, yeah, just flip the switch. We'll go on.
So, yes, it is complicated, and we've actually had this conversation with NIH multiple times because I think the follow-up to those two questions are who's driving the way that the budget is done? Is it NIH? Is it a steering committee? Or is it the PI? Because we get into this situation a lot where we have no control over what the fees are, what's paid out, and how it's paid out is done at either NIH or the steering committee level. So one of the things that I think we need to do is to educate somebody at NIH on how it works on the ground. They don't understand when they set those prices, and one of the things that we're supposed to do is make sure that those prices make sense and that they're actual expenses. Well, we don't have the ability to do that if NIH sets those prices for us, or tells us that we have to pay travel expenses separately. But we have had situations when the fixed price card approval came up, we were forced to turn 2 of our subs into cost reimbursable by NIH because they were about to hit the SAT. And we pleaded with NIH and explained to them, not only is it very difficult administratively for us to keep track of, but also NIH is losing money because we aren't paying for actual enrollment. We're paying now for your attempt to enroll. So we may put out, $1 million worth of money and get no enrollment because we have to pay for actual effort. That it didn't win, and we still had to go back and make some cost reimbursable. But we had several situations where we were forced into that model. And then one case, NIH came back and said, sorry, that didn't work out, we need to change that. So it's a problem.
Okay. Did you have something, Lisa?
I was just going to agree with Marcy that we do it, and it's a total PIA.
Okay. Anyone else on this?
And I would say, if you have a single investigator who's enrolling, but he also is working on the project in a different role, maybe he's an MPI, whatever, there are 2 different scopes of work. That means 2 different subboards.
Did you hear that? 2 different scopes of work, 2 different subboards?
I mean, we've had big projects where they have phase A, phase B, and it's all under the same umbrella, and it's all really falling under the same award. And so in that, we have not issued two different. What we have a problem with is carry forward, that doesn't carry forward on a multiple year project, and we have to reissue stuff.
Brenda, do you charge F&A on both of those?
Oh,
Well, that's the kicker, that's the kicker.
charging F&A on both.
You know, you have to think about how your postal board office is gonna do that. Because are they gonna say, okay, it's the same institution, and we're gonna reach the $25,000 threshold by adding them together? Or are they going to say, we want indirect on both of them, which NIH never awards them that way? That's one of the problems with two different stuff.
Yes?
Isn't it an option to just, I mean, maybe I'm being too rogue here, I don't know, but just call it cost reimbursable and explain the budget justification that the fixed rate per patient and fixed rate under NIH's definition of fixed rate? Because I don't feel like there's any special requirements in fixed rate, unless I'm totally wrong, because I haven't done it yet. But there's no special requirements in fixed rate that are going to totally change the terms and conditions. There's no reason to have two separate contracts. So you can have just cost reimbursable, it's all the same work, it's the same clinical trial. And for this portion, it's a fixed rate per patient under the same contract.
Did you have?
Oh, okay, hold on.
I think it almost might be harder to account for from an accounting perspective than from a contractual perspective, because you have to account for how they invoice for those expenses separately.
Right.
And so depending on what type of system you have, you may have to set up different tasks or break that out to be able to account for it. Where you're right, you're probably out of term to account for a portion of this is cost reimbursable, or a portion of this is fixed price, whatever. But it comes down to how you're going to pay it, manage it.
Exactly.
Well, and that's the purpose of the contractor, however their accounting system can handle it. Because some of the contractors can handle it perfectly fine. Like with a satellite account, someone set up two separate accounts. The same as like carry forward. Except I trust that your system can handle it, you know, to separate the money into separate accounts. So I don't think it's necessarily the pastor instinct job to micromanage how you're going to do your financing, as long as you can provide an invoice that provides me per patient cost and a cost reimbursable.
Maybe when you're talking about the past two entities having a more difficult time, not the invoicing on the other end. It could be both, but I know from our accounting classes that sometimes it's more difficult because invoices that they're getting are not well done.
And in some places, the invoices for cost reimbursement might come from their sponsored programs office. And in other instances, depending on how the clinical trial is structured, either the department will bill for those fixed rate amounts when they've met a milestone on the protocol, or the enrolling center, you know, if they have a CRO involved, the CRO will say, this is how many case report forms were entered in this quarter for this institution, and then basically cut a check to that institution for that. So there may be differences depending on the clinical trial as to how those finances and how you would bill for the capitated expenses on those.
All right. Because we have to, I realize, get through the rest of the agenda, what I'm going to suggest is we are going to lead this working group to revisit these issues and to revise the template sample. And so I'll let you know on the listserv when that group convenes so that we can get folks who are interested in talking about this to continue the discussion. And so I'm going to move on from that one just because we have a lot to get through. But yeah, you can also feel free to reach us afterwards and talk to us at the end. Just really, you know, I'm going to go very quickly to just say we were doing a lot over the summer. The FAQ working group worked on a whole bunch of new FAQs. And so I'm just going to send these out on the listserv. I'm projecting we're going to send a draft out in the next couple of weeks. We're nearing completion. And so just a snippet of what we're doing. We added FAQs on the appropriateness of requesting backup of an invoice. The takeaway message is don't ask by default. And how long is it appropriate to leave conditions for backup of invoices in your template. We had an entire session talking about the effective date that you should use when you're issuing a modification to a subrecipient. That's right, we talked an entire hour about the effective date. But feel free to give us feedback if you don't agree with what we have drafted. And then the foreign template group, I have to give a huge shout out to Julie Renkis, who led this new working group for the first time, and she developed, along with this very dedicated group, FAQs related to the use of the foreign templates. So thank you so much, Julie. And those FAQs are going to be incorporated into the main set of FAQs, and they did a deep dive of looking at every single FAQ and where we needed to highlight special considerations when issuing to foreign subs. So look out for that. What do we want to say about the financial questionnaire? We didn't get to talk about it today during the clearinghouse.
Right. So probably most of you heard this already in the clearinghouse session, but in case you didn't, the draft of the financial questionnaire was sent out to the FDP Expanded Clearinghouse listserv. So if you're not on that, you have not seen it. Here in the next week or two, there's going to be a survey that goes out to the contacts listed within the FDP Expanded Clearinghouse profile for each entity based on that financial questionnaire to get your feedback. So if you are interested in that, reach out to that individual at your institution so you can help to provide that feedback. Additionally, the FAQs and guidance that have been developed around the financial questionnaire will be shared more broadly with FDP, so be on the lookout for that as well. And if you have any questions at all, there's a new email address.
Yes, FQ,
Yeah.
fq@thefdp.org. All right, take it away.
Templates 2018. So at the last meeting, we agreed to a minor release. Just a reminder of what that means is that minor release means that there will be no changes to the language, to the terms and conditions of the templates. The idea here was that there were a couple of coding things that Laura Register was able to help us in stabilizing code, getting a few things to run better in the templates, and making those easier for institutions who manually populate their templates to use. So those are the only updates that have been done, or things that are kind of behind the scenes like that. It is not required to change over to the 2018 templates when they become available. At some point this month, we'll be posting those. So for those institutions that load your templates into a system, and it's always a big deal, you don't need to think about this release. You don't need to touch it. It's not going to impact what you guys are doing with your templates. And then just as a reminder, we are going to be talking about updates that are necessary for the 2019 version of the templates, and we'll be reaching out for people to work with us on that in January at the next meeting. And if there are any technical representatives that want to be involved in that, please let us know, because we'd be happy to have you join us. IACUC. So this is an interesting new issue for us. With the release of the 2017 templates, we had added some language around the use of vertebrate animals and IACUC approvals into the subaward templates. A little bit behind the scenes, we had a conversation with some various stakeholders, including OLA, that just really wanted to make sure that when we referenced the IACUC approval in the subaward, that we weren't taking the place of the IACUC MOU that is required by the guide. They didn't necessarily have a sense that the language that we had generated for the use of the FDP subaward template was 100% aligned with what they thought they would expect to see in terms of that MOU. So we agreed that is not the intent, and now as we've gone down this road, we've had some institutions reach out to us to say, is there a way to obviate or get around this need for a separate MOU? Can we incorporate those same terms and conditions that we would need to somehow supplement this and make sure that we don't have to have a separate agreement? And this is somewhat akin to the data use stuff where, you know, people don't want to have a separate data use agreement or a separate IACUC MOU. So we've reached out to the IACUC compliance subcommittee and we're working with them to see if we can come up with a future session. We've also talked directly with a couple of institutions that are interested in finding a way to incorporate the requirements of that separate OLAW MOU into the template to see what that might look like and how we could make that work. So as we start thinking about this project, what we really wanted to do in this session was to just ask people to go back home to your institutions and do some talking, maybe with your IACUC or some of the other stakeholders at your organization, to find out, you know, when does your IACUC require separate MOUs, or do they think the FDP template as it is now is close to sufficient? Would they like to incorporate this into the subaward templates? Or do they really feel that the separate IACUC MOU is something that is required? What operational barriers and opportunities are there at your institution in terms of implementing, sharing this kind of information? So for instance, in my office, the IACUC and my group report up through the same chain to the same AVP. So it would be pretty easy for us to join efforts and incorporate those two things. And we've actually talked a little bit about how we might do that. But at other institutions, that may not look the same. And you have
here.
a face that says that does not look the same.
No, I just have a question.
Sure.
Before this was referenced in the form, what were we doing with regards to these MOUs? Fine. I mean, was this an issue?
So I think separate MOUs were being issued by some institutions. I don't know what all institutions were doing. I can say that I know some institutions were issuing separate MOUs. I do know of at least one institution that was using the FDP subaward template or their subaward template writ large to incorporate language that they felt met the requirements of the guide as to who's responsible for the animals, where are they going to be housed, who's using them, etc.
I think there's a lot of confusion in this area in terms of what are the real OLA expectations here with these MOUs. And that's, so what we're seeing is everything under the sun. We're seeing institutions that are sending MOUs by default for just about every subrecipient that has animals. Is that necessary? We're seeing MOUs that may have 30 questions on it that are very project specific. And then there may be MOUs, which is one page, which is very basic information that maybe potentially could be language that we could just all agree to that you could have in a subword template and wouldn't be more burdensome. But I think there's some confusion, and I think as part of this, as we explore and as you talk within your institutions, we want to explore this further is, well, what are the real expectations? Maybe we are creating these burdens ourselves or being very risk averse by sending all of these things out unnecessarily. But what can we do to sort of blend it together, and does it make sense to include it in the, in the subword template, or does it not?
Right. And if it doesn't make sense to incorporate it into this template, maybe we work with the IACUC committee on MOUs, because there seems to be a wide range of practices that are happening. So this may be another interesting opportunity. We're going to talk to the IACUC subcommittee chairs and get some feedback from them and talk to them. But we just wanted to bring it up with you guys and start opening the door to this conversation, because this is an area where there may or may not be a lot of dialogue between your sponsor programs office and your IACUC around this particular subject area. So it may even be worth just getting a copy of what that MOU looks like for your institution and understand how that MOU process is triggered within your own IACUC. And that may be enough to just start us down that path, is getting some of that feedback from you guys.
All right.
DTUA. So this is a great collaboration. I'm going to invite Martha and Melissa to come up to the podium. Or stand
I have
at
a
the mic.
strategic position. Okay.
So use the mic. So I'm going to invite them to come up and talk to us. This came up a little bit during the DTUA session, the data transfer and use agreement session that we had around 1. Do you want me to start with giving some of this information, or do you want to start and I'll I'm happy to go either way.
So, you mentioned during the DTUA session, which was at 1 o'clock today, that we're other maps drafting opportunities, hoping to kick off simultaneously with when the 2019 template updates work is looking at that option that's right now in discussion to incorporate these language when there is human subject data that's being shared between the DT and substance. Because right now that option is there to incorporate language in the subaward, but we don't have the language that we propose or disagree on.
Right.
And so we hoped that in some institutions, folks are involved in subawards or DUAs, but maybe not both. And then we recognize that this working group needs to include both subawards experts and DUA experts. So if anyone's interested in this working group, we missed the session earlier. Martha and I are endeavoring to have our own webinar that will release the dates, hopefully the end of this month, early October, for anyone who's interested in a little DTUA 101 background kind of information.
And I'll just add, I know it says that they're on the slide, but just for clarity, this isn't going to mean that even if your institution expresses interest in this, that your institution will not be required to incorporate data use provisions in the subaward templates. This is just exploring what those options could look like, so that if you wanted to combine data use agreement and subaward as one when it was appropriate, that option would be available. And I think the second part of this is that we're hoping to use this as an opportunity now that the pilot for the DTUAs is kicking off to further reduce administrative burden around data use, and thinking about the opportunities for creating one document with all the obligations where it's appropriate. So this kind of outlines the scope of what we're hoping to do, and we're really just hoping that institutions will be able to go back and have some conversations within your own institution about whether or not incorporating data use terms into the subaward would be a good idea for your institution. We've heard from some institutions that it's the same group that issues the data use agreement, issues the subaward. It makes sense, it's easy. For other institutions, it may be a whole separate office that is not super related to the office that issues subawards, and so communication may be a bit more challenging, and it may just not work to incorporate those things together. So those are the things that we're hoping that even if you're not ready to add to the terms and conditions, you just want to share some of your experiences or what some of the barriers or challenges might be if you're getting subawards with data use terms in them. I think that that's another part of the conversation where we'd like to hear people's stories.
Yeah, absolutely. In addition to coming up with actual clauses that he's added, we understand there's some guidance has to go along with this. Talking points for deciding does this work for your institution, and so that they keep by and then I think, just in general, we see projects get delayed. Even if the subawards executed on time, everything's all hunky-dory, but we need to have data set. And no one's going to give you, or no one should give you data set unless you've got an executed QA. So if you don't realize 3 months into the subaward agreement that that was necessary, you've already delayed the project and the subaward's executed. And on the flip side of that, we've got plenty of faculty who think we're going to sub-assign years of data. And forget if you can't share that under the data set, ultimately data without so there are potential benefits to be considered if it's something that would work operationally, or even benefits to be considered in just be able to answer that question, even if you're not going to incorporate these terms, to be able to say in the subaward agreement, we are going to be able to see.
Right, and we do have that option built in now that, we're going to issue you a separate data use agreement. So, but this will help give some guidance around how do you ask those questions so you can at least get to the fact that there should be a separate data use agreement. All right, any questions about that? Okay. So the contact information for Melissa, Martha, and myself is over there. Please let us know if you're interested in being part of that collaboration. Certificates of confidentiality.
Yeah, how's this going for you? Recap. We gave you 2 options of language a couple of months ago. If you were on the subawards listserv, we modified option 2 slightly off a recommendation. So just to backtrack off of the new NIH policy concerning that their notice of award now acts as the certificate of confidentiality, pass-through entities are required to communicate the obligations to the subrecipients. We crafted 2 boilerplate language for you to consider to use in your templates. We figured we'd pilot this because this is such a new thing. We wanted to hear what you were using, what the issues were as you started using the language, what the issues were at your institution. So we're just going to take a minute or 2 before we get to the special guest star. If you have any feedback on that, if you've been talking to your general counsels, or if you've been using any of the boilerplate language to issue to your subs, what's any discussion happening around that? Nothing?
We're using it.
You're using it?
Which option are you using? The short?
You're using the shorter one?
Yeah, there's
Option
a long
2.
and a short. Yeah, one and a 2. Yeah, short one. Yeah. Has anyone gotten pushback on the option that you're using?
Has anyone gotten pushback on the language that we drafted from your general counsels? Yes? Did I hear a yes? No? Okay.
Crickets.
Crickets, they're quiet. They won't be quiet for long, trust me. So we are going to do a little survey on this to get, some data around which language you prefer, what's worked, and so that when Amanda starts leading up the work group again for the 2019 revisions of the templates, we will look at the survey data and figure out what to do next.
Absolutely.
Oh, and I did forget, before we get to our special guest star, I did forget one thing. If you remember from the last meeting, we created a draft change request document. If you have any content change requests that have to be really justified to the templates, we officially released that, and it is officially on the Subawards website. with guidance attached to it. Because we are trying to reduce not just the number of templates that we manage, but the number of content changes or additions that we make to it. So just as a reminder, we do have that up there. All right.
Great.
Okay, so actually, if we switch, not just we're going to switch the presentation to, that's the 60, it's more beautiful. Okay, so Kathy, I gave you the 16:9 widescreen. And so here's our special guest star, Kathy Kriedler. Now I know you guys are going to talk.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Kathy Kreidler. I am the Associate Vice President of Sponsor Projects at University of Texas in Houston. Prior to that, I was in LA at a smaller institution. So when I came to Texas about 2 years ago, kind of mid-size, about $250 million in annual funding. But a lot of things became much more evident when I made that leap to a larger institution. And so about 6 months ago, my boss walked into my office and he said, "Kath, why are our unbilled AR balances so high?" And I immediately interpreted that as, "Kath, our unbilled AR is too high, you need to fix it." So I started doing some digging, and for those of you who don't know what unbilled AR is, it is expenses that you've incurred on projects, but for whatever reason, you are unable to bill them to the other entity, sponsor, whatever. So I started, that kind of launched my 6-month project, and I talked to Dick, called him and chatted with him a little bit about it, and he had a fair amount to say about it, but then he directed me to Stephanie, and here we are. So what I started digging into is, at the time, our unbilled AR was at $6 million. So I separated that out and realized, luckily, that about half of that was due to one state agency in Texas, so it doesn't apply here. But the other half is because of our incoming subawards. So at any given time, we have $3 million unbilled on our books. And then I started thinking about our fantastic FDP templates. Like, these are wonderful, right? They're very easy to fill out. They were intended to standardize how we work with each other, reduce administrative burden. I've heard that probably 15 times just today. And it follows the rules, right? So my big question is, why do they still take so long? We don't have to negotiate, or there's very little negotiation. So I continued my dig. All right, so I looked at a 2-year period from July of 16 to June of 18. And I looked only at FDP subawards and only new ones, so no modifications or amendments. We received 274 incoming subawards from 107 different institutions. The average time for us to just receive the subaward from the pass-through entity was 91 days after it started. We went anywhere from 12 days before the start date to 557 days after the start date. So that was pretty significant and telling. You can see when you first look at this, it might not look so bad, because when you look at a graph and it's trending down over time, it might be okay, but that's not what this is. So the green columns, we got them within 60 days. The yellow, 61 to 120 days. And then the red is everything that was 4 months or later. So it would be nice, if the 80-20 rule went into place, where we got 80% of them in the green, but we don't. So just a little bit different picture of it. Of the 274 that we received, 156 of them So 57% were more than 60 days past the start date. Went a little bit further and looked at the different institutions. So we had 17 institutions that sent us at least 4 subawards in that time frame, that 2-year time frame. Only one institution of the 17 got it to us within 30 days every time. And another 2 were within 60 days. So there was no standardization with all of the other institutions. Sometimes we got it at 30 days, sometimes we got it at 170 days. It just depended. So, of course, I had to look in the mirror and see how UT Health was performing on getting subawards sent out. And we are no better. So it was remarkably similar, where the average was, so we're 1 day above average. And I don't know if Stephanie Gray was here. I remember a presentation she gave a long time ago about anything to the right of the top of the curve is failure. So that's kind of what I was thinking here, as we've got a lot on the failure side. So our range was minus 15 days to 368 days to get them out the door. So again, 56% as opposed to 57% or greater than 60 days. And I used 60 days as just an arbitrary target. If it's 30 days, we're obviously much worse. So, you know, it's just 60 seemed reasonable. That's the only reason I picked it. So what is the impact on the receiving institution? And I really wanted to think about this and talk about this because when we talk about administrative burden, we end up creating a lot for each other. And you know, if we don't have a subaward, we have to set up a you might call it a preliminary account, we call them guarantee accounts, whatever you want to call them, where you have to have the department say, yes, if something happens, then I'll cover the expenses. If you don't do that, then you're into cost transfer territory and effort reporting issues, which cause a lot of problems. Your unbilled AR, I don't know how many of you actually keep an eye on that, but trust me, I look at it every month now. And churning, this is a phrase that I use around UT Health that means, hey, it's Kathy again, just wondering if you're going to send me that subaward. Hey, it's Kathy. Yeah, we talked last week, still don't have that subaward. So it's churning, it's constant phone calls and emails, trying to follow up on where something is. And then Martha just mentioned science delays. You know, are they starting the project? Are they not starting the project? Do you actually know if we started the project and we're working on it? You know our PIs, they just start doing things. So, so those are kind of the impacts that we're causing on institutions, on each other. And why is that? Well, what did I say to Stephanie? I said, and I can't remember where I heard it, but if you've seen one research administration office, you've seen one research administration office. So we all have different processes and policies. We all have different ways of handling subawards. Who's the responsible office? Well, for us, it's our grants team. Elsewhere, it's procurement. Could be legal, could be a contracts team, who knows? And then there's that getting up to speed on what this is again. If your grants team is passing it to someone else, then that other team has to get familiar with what they're doing at the same time. So there's more time delayed in that. And of course, your whole process. We tend to have processes that we put in place 10 or 15 years ago because something bad happened and we don't ever want it to happen again, but we never circle back to review that process to say, do we still need to do this? So that's kind of just looking internally. Prioritization. With our grants team, their priority is getting proposals out the door, so subawards come to a complete halt at big deadline times. staffing and workload. Maybe you've got everything you need, but they're just waiting in line because they just haven't gotten to them yet, which is a big case of ours. If there's a different risk level on it, it might be a little more complicated, so you set it aside. There's all different reasons about that, getting final documents from the PI, and of course, awaiting for your compliance approvals. So there's many reasons for causes and delays, but again, are there ways that we can work on this to maybe get these taken care of a little bit faster and ease the burden on each other? So moving forward, we wanted to have a conversation today with identifying best practices, maybe looking at some expanded pilot data, doing a survey, learning from those who do this very well, and apparently there's one institution that does this well. Thinking outside the box for new options, and that really means letting go of some of what is ingrained in our brains. For example, can we issue them for the full project period? And what would that look like? Can we, I don't know, you guys have any ideas? Yes.
I'm Marcy. I don't want to say one from
Come on.
unless I'm the one that does it right or well. I don't know where the mic. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I'll repeat it.
I have a loud voice. So I work at Florida State University, and up until recently, I was the sole issuance of subs, unless sometimes people would help me out, and it just was hard, very hard. But now we're going to have 2 of us full time. So the other thing that's happened is because of how invoices are coming in and problems with invoices, we used to issue for more than 1 year, but we are not doing it anymore because we're not getting invoices in a timely manner, and that falls on us to monitor. And as we heard earlier somewhere in one of our meetings, the federal agency is not going to monitor, they're putting it on you. And our post-award is so busy that they are actually trying to figure out how can they track those that haven't sent an invoice in 9 months or a year. And so it's rough. So at this point, we've been told we're not issuing for more than a year. We haven't had any pushback from the PI. The other thing, when you mentioned start date, awards don't come in timely sometimes. And requests, we don't have an automatic process. It has to be asked for, and I can't read their mind. And so I would get a request, and the award start date was 3 months ago. So if you're looking at that, then that's not fair to those of us that are trying. It may take me a month or 6 weeks or whatever, but then it looks like it's been 5 months, and it's not.
Right. It is award start date, and it's the 90-10, 80-20 rule. For the most part, we have a notice of award from NIH within a week of the start date, if not a couple of days before. But yes, so that's just one option. One idea is issuing more than 1 year at a time. Maybe we start it just in time process. Maybe we appeal to our federal agencies and ask them to split an award when there's a multi-PI. There's all kinds of things, but again, we have to think about options and brainstorm together to try and fix it. And that's if you all agree that this is something that we even should address. So that's where we're at.
I knew you were going to start talking, everybody that is. So we got a line now. Go for it.
Okay, so the proverbial wisdom has been you can't give away money you have any receipt or okay? But I don't want us to get here to be amazed. I think this is a really intriguing way to start thinking about things. I think some type of a survey is an excellent way to start. From our standpoint, we're not going to push out a sub until our PI says, hey, push out that sub. So perhaps a study of how we get that process going could be really interesting. This morning when I stood up and said, I think that there's possibilities when federal agencies and our group could work closer together. One thing I had in mind was a UM1 we received from NIH, and it's a type of clinical trial. They had seen that there were a lot of delays to clinical trials and getting subs in place and IRB, and they said, we're going to give you a much longer period of pre-award cost authorization. But by the time you hit that start date, you have to be ready to go. Everything has to be, like you already have to kind of have your agreement and everything in place. So I feel like there's a possibility here where, you know, some of our sponsors could help us solve this problem. I think we need to do the analysis first. What is really causing the delays? Are there some best practices, things that we can adopt? But then I think there could be a pitch to, you know, you're in it, your MOE starts, you're in go mode on that day. That's not when you get it and you start to hire. Right. Because then it just leads to the same problems of you haven't spent some time in the no-cost extensions, which, you know, is a problem across the board.
Right.
I think this is a great conversation. It's not really a question.
Hi, Michael Kubiak, University of California. A few observations. I remember when I first started out at the sponsor project office at Berkeley. Doing some awards, we're always at the bottom, right? Because you have to get those proposals out, set the awards, and you know when you have to win them. You don't see challenges. Who cares? What I've seen is the evolution, and I'm sure in the survey we could find this out, that you seem to have specialization around sub-awards now. You have sub-award teams. That's something that's pretty much fully evolved in the UC system. That would be interesting to know if that model is what's happened, that sort of specialization. One thing we have internally, since we are one legal entity, is kind of an expedited sub-award process, because we don't give each other sub-awards. We move money around. So I wonder if there's like different levels of risk for us to consider of streamlining our processes more with our templates. One thing that I know a long time ago, when I was more engaged with ERA stuff, was this idea of getting feeds from the federal agencies and their awards. Could we look at leveraging data feeds and then having automated systems to help us send out sub-awards? And another model I'm aware of through our own research programs. We have research programs that are funded for the state of California. Actually, some other universities outside of UC might receive money for those, but in some instances where we've identified sub-awards, the program office actually sends it out directly. So maybe it's a conversation about what's the actual collaboration, and maybe the prime funder could send out the sub-award and explore those options.
Right.
You made a face.
Because you're thinking outside the box.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Cameron Curtis from the University of Missouri Columbia. I want to share, I won't call it best practice yet because we just implemented it. That's a little close. But what we have, before, so I don't manage the sub-awards, that's my, a person who I share my office with. But she used to track it by Excel and through emails. And so kind of in reference similar to what the NSM was talking about earlier, but using IT to review. We had issues with tracking it through email and through Excel. In fact, we ended up losing some sub-awards, not losing them, missing them because, and so the result, there were 8 sub-awards that were not issued, which you can imagine was a big issue. As a result of that, instead of lamenting and not knowing what to do, we took advantage of it. We actually created a dashboard that we just rolled out 2 weeks ago. And how it generally works is generally our pre-award staff, it can be post-award staff, it creates that's all laid out very much similar to the FTP template. And they enter the award, all information, and it goes to my person I share office with, and then from there she's all the documents, she's all the information. So we're hoping with that process that should help change. So I'm going to bring it to your all's attention as again, if it's something that we can kind of share our progress with. It might be a while again because we just implemented it, so it might be a while to see changes. But I'm sure we will be willing to share our experience with how that goes.
What institution you say you were from again?
University of Missouri Columbia.
Thank you.
Yeah, Jamie Zabo is our main contact. But if you guys are interested, we can share those as we go along with it.
That's very interesting.
Well, it's making me think a little bit about if you guys agree that a survey is a first step. I mean, I think we also want to explore what the next step options are. And as I'm hearing these different ideas, it's making me think about what should be included in this survey. So for example, Do you have electronic systems that automatically issue subawards? You know, what do your electronic systems look like? Do you have a cradle to grave model, or do you have a separate subawards team? I've heard several times now about, oh, the priority is getting proposals out. Well, my institution isn't set up that way. We have a separate subaward team that does it. The types of individuals. I mean, I can also say that your model could be that you have legal experts issuing subawards versus a certain different type of staff. It could be that you're focusing a little bit more on language or versus getting things out. I know at my institution there's a lot of pressure to get subawards out really, really fast. We're not the one in your 30. Unfortunately, but we're doing okay. But, you know, it could also just be the focus. So let's hear what you've got to say, Maura.
So we took into consideration how much happens at the beginning of the award process for the departments and for the PIs. And we were sensitive to that. And we're not that one either. So this is just an initiative that we're trying. So with that in mind, with so much happening at the award stage, what we're trying to do is leverage as soon as we know we have an award with subs on it. We go into the department and start having now discussions about what could be the delays. And we get, you know, so if there's information still pending, we help them at that little sweet spot before where there might be a month that we're still processing the award. So we're already reaching out. So that's one thing that's helped us a lot, especially on more complicated projects. It's not quite there, but again, it takes some of that detail from the proposal stage to say, here are all of our pending, proposals that have subs on it, and we can get to that information really well at the award stage. And then it also could involve reverse engineering at the award stage instead of waiting for a request to come in. And I hear, the PI's not going to issue, but a lot of time we're not finding that. We're finding that it's downstage that they think about the sub-award as they get the project approved. So instead of waiting for the request to come to us, we would like to entertain the idea of sending out the request at the award stage with a series of skeleton questions to get the ball rolling with that.
We actually just implemented that because, waiting for a department to tell you to go when you pretty much have what you need doesn't make sense. But what we do is we prepare the sub-award, send it to the department for a review and approval, and then send it out. But it's 99% of the time they are going to issue the sub.
Yes.
So why plan for that 1%? If it happens, it happens. You just don't sign it. But it definitely makes a difference.
I think when thematic came into play, a lot of us switched from sending out our sub-awards pre-signed to waiting and being the second signature. And it strikes me that we may have a FTP opportunity here in saying if we had some kind of a commitment across FTP institutions to say, we will make sure our FTP partner has whatever profound information they need in time for them to do their timely reporting, we could go ahead and say, let's send these things out pre-signed. So instead of an out, back again, instead of 3 rounds, we got 2. And that, I think, could really help with this process. But I know so many of us, at least, I don't know if you guys have changed. We haven't. We're still sending out unsigned. Okay. But that could be, just by itself, I think, a real help with this. My other comment is going to be, I'm actually one of those schools that doesn't have a specialized sub-award team on purpose. Although we do have somebody dedicated to helping with invoice processing and risk analysis. But my thinking is that my contract and grant administrators have just gone through that award. They know what needs to get flowed down. They have it in their head. If I hand it off, I'm creating another handoff and that, and I'm creating the need for somebody else to come up to speed with it, as well as messing with my trying to have a single point of contact for my faculty and department. And so I think there's some trade-offs there where, both models are
Absolutely.
have pros and
Yeah,
cons,
right.
right? But it would be interesting to see what the range is and also what people's thinking is about why they selected the model they did, how long they've had it in place, what their growth rates have been, and what kind of success or not success they've had with retaining that model over time.
Great, yeah. It was very interesting. I started looking at amendments as well, and I was surprised, and I couldn't get clean data on the amendment piece, but anecdotally, they were taking just as long as a new award. And we're getting a lot of pushback on the unilateral. So we try to make things easier, but then institutions are hanging on to things that they might not necessarily need to hang on to as far as policies.
My question is actually about your metrics. When you say receipt of some award, are you talking about receiving it initially before negotiation, or is it
Yes.
receipt of full execution?
No, I am talking about we have nothing to do until that award arrives on our doorstep. So it's that receipt date.
Okay,
And then there's probably another 30 days to get it fully executed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Just the context made a difference.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's just to
That's a big
just to
difference.
receive it.
One thing that we changed recently was that we don't hold some awards for risk assessments unless they're foreign or a brand new organization who's never sub to, or they're on our own internal high risk list. And that dramatically, because we have a sub-award team, we have one person doing sub-awards, we did over 600 last year. We have one person doing risk assessment, and he's also our audit guy, and we have a lot of stuff on his plate. So cutting out, the UG didn't specifically say you have to do a risk assessment before you issue a sub, it said you must do one. So we do them, but if we know, we issued $1 million to UC Berkeley last year, so if it's another UC Berkeley sub, we're not gonna look for risk assessment. That's
Right,
not
right,
our turnaround
right.
for sure.
Right.
We move to every 3 years for risk assessment.
Right.
For all of us as auditors.
Nice.
We do that.
Can I ask others, if you have an NIH 4 or 5 year, and like we have to reissue ours every year because we do not carry forward, do you do a new risk assessment on the same entity every year? Do you have the same award?
No.
Yes.
We just recently started a sub-award team in April, and I'm charged with managing that, like throwing a bucket of oranges in here, trying to catch them all at once. We had an audit in April brought by our internal audit, and they deemed that we were not sufficiently performing risk assessments because we didn't do them annually. They don't want us to do, if we get a 3-year award, they still want us to issue our sub-award 1 year at a time with the and at the amendment time, they want us to do a new risk assessment.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So one thing I was going to say is one question that we recently parsed through at our institution was the institutional level assessment versus a project level assessment. So the way that we've broken ours out is to say once a year we assess the institution, as we're issuing them a new sub-award, and then thereafter it's just the project specific for the rest of the year. And then when we're issuing the modification, we have a question on our PI's form, which is, are you satisfied with the progress of your subrecipient's work? And if the answer is yes, and we have invoices on file from them, then we just go ahead and issue the subaward. That is the only assessment that we do. We don't do another separate project level risk assessment because the PI and our invoice monitoring should be that assessment. So that's one thing that we've tried to do to streamline that portion of it. And I don't know though if that's how everyone does it and if there's a way to maybe put some more information out there around what risk assessments may need to be done when, or how to think about that.
We only got 1 more minute.
So it's more a comment on, I'm looking at some of the data, and looking at, is there a certain time of year or certain times of year where your days are better than others? Because I will say, you know, if you're looking at FGE template only subs, oh, well, I mean, and I'm also part of medical school, but most of ours are NIH. And the later the budget gets approved, the worse it is. But you have a church that comes in November, and then it's a little bit more, and then it's a little bit more, and then blam, September is like, what you say, right? And so when you look at that trajectory with your notices, that's also your volume of stuff that you have to be issuing. In addition to the notices, you have to be processing, and issuing those notices.
Right.
And it seems to be worse the later that the budget gets passed. And I don't know what we do with that, but it would be interesting data to look at.
Yeah, I did not look at dates, but I certainly can, just to see what it does over time. Yeah.
All right. Since we're at time, in terms of next steps with this, yeah, this could go on. I'm going to suggest, we regroup, and maybe this sounds like potentially a work group to develop what questions we want to ask. Does that sound like the first good step? All right, I already see hands. I want to join. All right, so we'll send out a follow-up on the listserv to start recruiting people to be involved with the Kathy Kreidler project, the Untitled. Okay, there you go. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Do I have anything left on these slides?
Thank you very much.
Oh.